Welcome to the Nourish Child Podcast, a show about childhood nutrition, feeding kids, and dealing with the ups and downs of growing a healthy child. Here's your host, registered dietitian and childhood nutrition expert, Jill Castle.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Nourish Child Podcast. I'm your host, Jill Castle. If you've ever felt like you've failed your child somehow, or you beat yourself up for your parenting decisions, failures, or inadequacies, then this episode will hopefully shed some light on how to embrace self-compassion in parenting and leave unproductive self-criticism behind. Today, I'm honored to have Dr. Kristin Neff on the show. She is an associate professor of educational psychology at the University of Texas at Austin. She's a pioneer in the field of self-compassion research, conducting the first studies on self-compassion nearly 20 years ago. She's been recognized as one of the most influential researchers in psychology worldwide and is the author of the bestselling book, Self-Compassion. Along with her colleague, Chris Germer, she developed the Mindful Self-Compassion program and co-wrote the Mindful Self-Compassion Workbook. Her newest book is Fierce Self-Compassion: How Women Can Harness Kindness to Speak Up, Claim Their Power, and Thrive. Welcome to the show, Dr. Neff.
Hi, Jill. Thanks so much for having me.
I'm fascinated by how you got into this work, first off. Can you share with us some of the story behind what led you to focus on self-compassion?
Yeah, well, so for me, it was personal practice. It was my last year of graduate school at University of California, Berkeley. And I was basically a basket case. I had just gotten a divorce, really messy divorce. And I was also feeling a lot of stress about, I was getting my PhD, but would I get a job? The chances seemed pretty slim. And so I thought I'd learn mindfulness meditation to deal with my stress. And luckily for me, the person leading the mindfulness meditation group talked about the importance of self-compassion as well as other compassion. Mm-hmm. And it was like, what? You mean you're supposed to be kind to yourself as well as others? What's that about? But, I was so stressed and it was so challenging that I just tried it. I tried being more understanding toward myself. I tried being warmer and more supportive. Kind of, they said, talk to yourself like you might speak to a friend you cared about. So I tried it out. And I was just so impressed by the immediate difference it had in my ability to cope with all the stress I was experiencing. And then luckily I did get a job. At first I did 2 years of postdoctoral study with one of the country's leading self-esteem researchers. And then I got the job at University of Texas at Austin. And I realized that self-compassion filled a lot of the gaps in the literature in terms of how to relate to yourself in a healthy manner that hadn't been researched before. Mm-hmm. That was 20 years ago, and here I am today. So it's been a long ride.
Well, and if you click on the research button on your website, it is pages and pages and pages of research.
Yeah, there are over 4,000 studies now. Not by me, of course, but yeah, there's a lot of research out there. So
yeah. So I tapped into your TED Talk and that was awesome. One of the things that just really struck me, I'm a parent of 4 children. They're all flown and grown at this juncture, but I was definitely in the throes of, we want our kids to have a good self-esteem. It was everybody on the soccer field got a trophy at the end of the year. Yeah. I mean, self-esteem and building self-esteem was such a critical part, I feel like 20 years ago, even when I was raising my own children. Yeah. But you talk about self-esteem and the potential consequences of focusing on that. Can you share that with the listeners today, sort of the difference between the two and how they relate?
Yeah, well, so self-compassion means treating yourself with kindness, care, concern like you would anyone you cared about. And particularly, it's about how you relate to yourself in moments of struggle, suffering. That passion in the Latin means, how are you with your suffering? And at the basis of self-compassion is a sense of unconditional self-worth. I'm an imperfect human being. All human beings are worthy of compassion just by nature of being human. Self-esteem is also a form of self-worth, but for most people, it's not unconditional, and it's not about being human. It's about being special and above average. right? So the sense of worth is linked to self-esteem, and the word esteem means a judgment. It's like judging yourself positively. You judge yourself positively if you're better than the next guy, or if you succeed, or if you look the way you want to look, or you're successful as successful as you want to be. But what happens when that's not the case? Right? When you fail, you make a mistake, or someone else is doing it better, or you don't look the way you want, or things don't work out the way you plan, then typically your self-esteem takes a nosedive.
Yeah.
And so you might say self-compassion is an unconditional source of self-worth. Nothing wrong with self-esteem. It's just the problems come when it's conditional. For instance, why do kids start to bully each other? We know this. Why do they start to bully each other around middle school? Well, they're starting to build the sense of identity and self-esteem. Am I a cool kid? Am I strong? Am I looked up to? And bullying, by picking on the weird kid, that's one of the ways kids get a sense of self-esteem. It's not a healthy way, but, so from my point of view, most ways of getting self-esteem are unhealthy, not all of them, but typically they're contingent. It's like, and you're running on a treadmill, you can't get off because you're never going to be perfect. You're a human being. There's always going to be someone doing it better. And so you might say self-esteem is a fair weather friend. It's there for you in the good times when you're doing well, but it deserts you when you need it most. And that's when you failed or rejected or feeling badly about yourself. Self-compassion is a constant friend. It's that friend that's there for you in, good times and in bad times, especially when you're struggling. That's when self-compassion steps in and says, hey, everyone struggles. It's okay. It's part of being human.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting because, you talk a little bit also, you mentioned bullying, but you also talk a little bit about the societal norms.
Yes.
And I think, that is just growing by leaps and bounds. I think for parents today,
Yeah.
thin, fit, smart, sporty, everybody's driven to raise the same kind of kids. And it's impossible. And that drive produces a lot of guilt and shame.
The drive itself produces shame,
Or the
sense that if you don't measure up, it.
Yes.
By the way, are you talking about the parents or the kids or both?
I think I'm talking about the parents at this point.
Okay.
Yeah,
the kids, right? Because the kids are a reflection of us.
Yes, yeah, both, really. But and actually, we could talk about how a parent's shame and guilt trickles down to their child, and what that impact is as well.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I will talk about that. With this competitive culture we're raised in, and it's gotten just hyper competitive with social media, and people use filters, and you can actually quantify how many people like you as opposed to just estimating it, right?
Yeah.
It's really made things even worse than they used to be. And so the pressures to feel good about yourself and the reasons we don't are just so numerous. So there's a saying I like, which is the goal of practice, self-compassion practice, is simply to be a compassionate mess. In other words, like you give up trying. Well, it's not that you give up trying, and we'll get to that. You don't lose your motivation at all, quite the opposite. But you stop expecting perfection, right? Mm-hmm. Because you are a human being and things will be messy. That is life. You did not get born into the everything will go perfect till the day I die plan. That's not what being a human being means. And so when you stop focusing so much on getting it right and start to focus more on opening your heart, how can I care for myself in this moment? How can I be friendly? How can I be helpful? What can I learn from this? Mm-hmm. What happens is your focus shifts. It's not so much on the end goal. It's more the process of how are we relating to ourselves along the way, which is, most of the time, actually, it's all our lives. And so that's real. One big difference with self-esteem. Self-esteem is almost like a final achievement. Mm-hmm. Self-compassion is a way of being with ourselves, in good times and in bad.
Yeah. Yeah. And it doesn't sound like it comes naturally for people.
Well, it doesn't. That's the good news is it's not difficult because most of us have experience being compassionate with others, with a good friend or, family members or someone we care about. The bad news is it doesn't come totally natural. There are two reasons. One is actually evolutionary, right? Mm-hmm. So evolutionarily, when we feel threatened in some way, we go into fight, flight, or freeze mode. And so if we have a thought about ourselves like I'm falling short or I'm not popular, right? We feel threatened. So we fight ourselves, we criticize ourselves, thinking it'll help us change, or we flee from others in a sense of shame and isolation, or we freeze and get stuck and we ruminate. We also have another evolved system, the care system. That's actually tended to evolve for our children and our group members. And that's another way of feeling safe toward like soothing and comforting and a sense of belonging. So when your best friend fails, you aren't so personally threatened. So you can tap into your care system to be there for your friend. So we're doing a little hack, which feels a little weird, I admit it, but it's not that hard. Once you get in the habit of it, after you get over the initial weirdness of it, it just starts feeling natural, and our body reacts the same way. If we're giving ourselves kindness, or we're giving another kindness, or someone else is giving us kindness. So part of it is physiology, and the other is culture. I mean, how many of us were raised thinking self-compassion is a good thing? We're told it's self-pity, it's self-indulgent, it's selfish, it'll make you weak, it'll make you lazy. All of those are not only untrue, it's the exact opposite. That's what the research shows. It makes you able to sustain caring for others without burning out. It makes you strong. When you go through something tough, if you're an ally as opposed to an enemy toward yourself, you can have more strength that can get through. It makes you more motivated, but it changes the source of motivation. Instead of being motivated because I want to have high self-esteem, right? Or because I'm going to beat myself up if I don't achieve my goals, we're motivated because we care, just like hopefully we are with our children. We motivate our kids not because like we're going to spank them if they don't get good grades, but because we want them to succeed in life.
Yeah.
That motivation for our kids comes from care.
Yeah.
And actually especially for this audience, and especially because they listen to you, a really good way to think about what self-compassion looks like is, what does an ideally compassionate parent look like? A compassionate parent is not an indulgent parent. If you let your kid do anything they want, you aren't alleviating their suffering, you're harming them. Compassionate parent has boundaries, has expectations, has rules, but does so from a place of love, not because we're going to shame our kids if they don't meet our standards.
Yeah.
Right. A compassionate parent motivates their kid to go to school, get good grades, exercise, eat well, not because I'll hate you if you don't, but again, because I love you and I want you to succeed in life. And so all those behaviors that go along with being an ideally compassionate parent, and of course we aren't always ideally, but ideally, that's what we can model for ourselves. And the effects that you would have on your kid, if your kid comes home with a bad grade and you say, I hate you, I'm ashamed of you, get out of here. I hope that makes you cringe. It should.
Yeah.
What effect would that have on your kid? Think about that. But we say that to ourselves and it has the same effect.
Yeah.
So this isn't rocket science. It's common sense, but for whatever reason, evolutionarily, culturally, we have it all wrong, and we think we're being good to ourselves by being hard on ourselves. We aren't. We're pulling the rug out from underneath ourselves.
That's so fascinating, because my brain is going into sort of, two things that are occurring to me. I've looked at a lot of the research on self-esteem and child development and how that relates to body image and body satisfaction and eating disorder rates and things of that nature. But I'm curious if they're doing self-compassion research.
Oh, yeah.
With this.
It's more effective. So a lot of self-compassion research for body image and eating disorders. And it's what it does. So we did one study where we had women with body image concerns just do the practices on my website for 3 weeks. And this is important. Their sense of self-worth was less contingent on their appearance after doing those practices for 3 weeks. So it actually changes the source of your self-worth. With self-esteem, usually your self-worth is contingent on looking the way you want to look. And you might say, okay, you don't look the way you want to look, but you can still like yourself. But like, why? How? I mean, what am I supposed to hang my self-esteem hat on?
Yeah.
Self-compassion gets rid of the self-evaluation piece altogether and says you are intrinsically worth, just like a newborn baby is intrinsically worthy of care and warmth and kindness and support. So are we as human beings. And so it reduces negative body image, it reduces eating disorders, it encourages intuitive eating, and it basically helps people realize it increases like body appreciation. Yeah, maybe my body doesn't look like my ideal, but it works.
Yeah.
It's functioning. It's I'm healthy. So it
Yeah.
really changes the basis on which we get our sense of self-worth and even happiness.
Hmm.
Our sense of happiness comes from just kind of being a live person trying the best we can, as opposed to having all our happiness absolutely dependent on outcomes like how we look or how much money we make or how successful we are.
Yeah. Yeah. Seems like in this day and age, we need a lot more self-compassion.
It helps. It
Yeah.
absolutely helps.
Yes. So I wanted to particularly sort of talk about parents who might be raising a larger bodied child
Mm-hmm.
or a smaller bodied child. And frankly, I'm choosing them because I feel like their degree of stress and perhaps shame and guilt, perhaps, I'm not going to make an assumption that's the feeling, but I hear that quite a bit from some of the families that I've worked with, just that the enormous amount of guilt around raising a child who has different a different size or a different appearance or different habits around eating or exercise. Just the guilt around the child who's a couch potato. I'm tried to motivate, I just can't do it. Parents feel it's a failure on themselves, and so I'm hoping that you can sort of talk to those parents and help them.
Yeah, well, so my child's autistic, and so I certainly know what it means when your child acts differently in public, or,
Mhm.
he was tantruming when he was like 7 years old, way past the age you're supposed to stop tantruming. So I do understand some of that. I mean, part of what's happening, and I think it's natural, we don't want to beat ourselves up for this, but our sense of self esteem gets wrapped up in our children's behavior, our children's appearance, or, what do other people think of our child and how that reflects on us.
Mhm.
So some of that is going on. Um, but also, I think a lot of it is, we want our kids to be happy.
Mhm.
And we know when our kids act a certain way or look a certain way or, get a certain level of grades or whatever it is, that's going to help smooth their way in life.
Mhm.
So, I mean, I think we need to give ourselves some compassion for some of these difficult feelings we have if our children are maybe, acting differently or behaving differently than we would ideally want. Um, but what I found with Rowan, he's my son, his autism, that the more I could give myself compassion for the difficulty, if it was my difficulty being an autism parent, so I didn't say like, oh, Kristin, you have nothing to complain about. Rowan's suffering a lot worse. I gave myself permission to be moved by my own struggle, to be moved by this is just really hard. It's stressful. It's difficult.
Kids change a lot. Their nutrition needs, eating habits, and food preferences do too. So much so, it can be hard to keep up. The Nourished Child, a website designed for parents who want more nutrition education, helps parents like you get crystal clear on raising good eaters. We've cracked the code on nourishing the whole child, whether you're raising a baby, a teen, or a child with health concerns. Our nutrition school and parent education programs help you get the inside scoop on food and nutrients, positive food parenting, and building self-motivated, autonomous kids who are good eaters. Visit thenourishedchild.com today.
And what I found is the more accepting and kinder and more supportive I could be toward myself, the more accepting and kinder and more supportive I could be toward my son.
Yeah.
Right. And it's difficult. So, for instance, like eating, my son loves to eat and he was a teenager and could eat anything and now he's not. And, so we're having to negotiate all that. So I kind of know this firsthand. And of course, as a parent, you want your kid to be healthy,
Mhm.
but you do. And it's challenging. You don't want your child's sense of self-worth to be contingent on their body size or, even if they're eating healthy foods or not. So it's a process. We'll get it wrong. We'll make mistakes. But if you bring, going back to that compassionate mess, if you just bring compassion to the whole thing, compassion to your child, compassion to yourself, compassion for their mistakes, compassion for our mistakes, Now, a lot of people are afraid that compassion means you're going to like let yourself off the hook. You're going to make a mistake and not take responsibility. Or your kids, you're going to be so accepting that they aren't going to be motivated to make the changes that are necessary for their health. It's actually the exact opposite. The more accepting we are of ourselves and our children, the more we can start to motivate again from care, right? The bottom line, when you feel safe enough, when a child feels safe enough to know their parents accept them unconditionally, when we feel safe enough to know that we are acceptable unconditionally, then it's like this safety net. So we can take risks. And if we fail, well, then what can I learn from this and how can I try again?
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so it actually leads to more effective motivation. It leads people to take more responsibility because it's safe to admit where you've made a mistake.
Yeah.
It's not intuitive, but there's a lot of research that demonstrates that.
Yeah.
And here's the thing about kids. And I really found this with autism because, some people say autistic kids don't have empathy skills. I know there's a research clinic. It's not true. From my point of view, that's BS. Autistic children have challenges with perspective taking. All children have challenges with perspective taking, like putting himself cognitively in someone else's shoes.
Yeah.
But all kids also they have mirror neurons, parts of all people, adults and children, huge parts of our brain are used to register and feel the emotions of others. And actually with autistic children, that's partly why they withdraw, because they're so sensitive that they need to withdraw because they get overwhelmed by other people's energy. But parents and kids are pretty connected, and our kids feel what we're feeling just as we feel what they're feeling, even if no one's saying anything. It's not woo-woo. This is what the brain does. So maybe you're careful not to criticize your child, but if in front of them you criticize yourself, you're doing two things. A, you're modeling for your child, oh, this is a good way to be with yourself, which is not the lesson we want to teach.
Mm-hmm.
Two, if you are stressed and frustrated and angry and full of shame at yourself, your child, through their mirror neurons, is picking up on all that. If you are forgiving, loving, kind, open, feeling connected, peaceful, your child is picking up on that. So I used to actually regulate my son's emotions by using self-compassion. So, when he was tantruming, this would also go with any younger kid, but even adolescents, they have a lot of hard time self-regulating.
Mm-hmm.
When you get stressed out and frustrated, or, by the fact that they're having a hard time self-regulating, it just gets into this negative spiral. We've all been there.
Yeah.
But if you can give yourself compassion, like pause, give yourself some kindness, some warmth, again, honor that it's hard, that you aren't alone as part of being a parent, give yourself some kindness and warmth and support. What happened with Rowan is he would start to calm down when I did that. And then after I calmed down, he would start to calm down. Then I could actually more directly try to help him.
Yeah.
So, we're connected. All human beings are connected, but especially parents and kids are connected. So what you cultivate inside, communicating to your child at all times, think about that.
Yeah.
It's not one more thing to beat yourself up on. Well, give yourself a break, but
yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like,
and a little self-knowledge.
What we embody is what we teach our kids.
Yeah. Yeah. And so if I hear what I hear you saying is, self-awareness is really important as well. If you're hypercritical on yourself, that is somehow probably coming through to your child, whether you're consciously doing that or not.
Yeah. So, and it's not, again, not to guilt you, just, making you feel bad about it, but just to realize that you aren't helping anyone by being harshly self-critical.
Yeah.
Right? You certainly aren't helping your child.
Yeah.
And so finding a way, just as with our kids, ideally we motivate them like a good coach, with encouragement, with support. How can I help you? What do you need?
Yeah.
We can start to do that with ourselves. And that model of self-relating communicates itself to our children and actually really helps them.
Yeah. Yeah. Is it possible or I'm sure it is possible, I'm wondering if you can sort of coach us through how you teach a child self-compassion.
Yeah. So we have, I developed the Mindful Self-Compassion program with my colleague, Chris Germer, for adults. We have a teen version of the program, which is a lot of research, seems to be really effective, helps with like suicidal ideation, bullying, etc. And we're developing a kids program now. It's not fully rolled out yet, but it almost is. So basically, it's kind of similar to how we teach adults. One of the best metaphors for self-compassion is friendship. By about age 7, kids are understanding what friendships mean. It's a very good way for parents to teach kids self-compassion, to talk about not only do you need to be a good friend to others, you need to be a good friend to yourself. Now, would you say that to a good friend? Luckily, children are naturally pretty empathetic. Again, it's built in evolutionarily. So you can help them turn that empathy and concern and kindness, that helpful attitude inward, just like they would to a friend. So that's probably one of the easiest ways. There are other ways that can be worked on. There's some really great books on self-compassion for parents. There's one by Lorraine Hobbs, and there's Self-Compassion for Parents by Susan Pollack. This is a really good one.
So as you look back over your 20 plus year career in this field, what are sort of some of the surprises that you've learned over the years, and some of the sort of things you wish were more mainstream and more sort of common knowledge?
Yeah. Well, I guess maybe it wasn't a surprise, but I really wish it was more common knowledge that self-compassion enhances motivation. It doesn't undermine it. The number one block to self-compassion is people think it's going to undermine their motivation. They think they need to be hard on themselves, critical with themselves to get things done, to succeed in life, so they won't be lazy or complacent. It's the exact opposite, right? So self-criticism, it works in the short term, just like criticizing your kids. Harsh punishment works short term for your kids. Yeah, they'll comply. They'll comply in the short term. But what are the long-term effects? They start losing faith in themselves. They start becoming anxious. They start developing fear of failure. They don't have that security of unconditional acceptance. So that starts messing with them psychologically. Exact same thing with ourselves.
Yeah.
Right. And so the research is very clear. It leads to less fear of failure, less performance anxiety, more stick-to-itness, because when you fail, you can say, okay, everyone fails. What can I learn from this? And we keep trying again. So I really wish that was more common knowledge, because it's such a shame that people get that one wrong. In terms of one thing that surprised me is it was actually easier than I thought it would be to teach people self-compassion. Because it's not natural. I thought, oh, it's going to be really hard, and it can be bumpy at first. It can feel a little weird. I'm not going to deny it, but because we already have, I have to say, especially women, because women are raised to be. By the way, I'm not talking about biological sex. People who are raised to be women are given so many lessons about how to be compassionate to others, how to care for others. We're told we shouldn't care for ourselves. We are entitled to meet our own needs. So we actually have more compassion for others than people raised as men, and less compassion for ourselves. But because of that, we know how to do it already. It's like the templates, what to say, they're already in us. We aren't starting from scratch. Most of us have already very well developed skills of compassion, right? We just don't use them with ourselves.
Yeah.
So that's the good news. It's like, okay, it's not rocket science. It's actually not that complicated. It's very common sense. It's really more about people give themselves permission to be kind and supportive toward themselves. Yeah. And it really reduces burnout. So for parents or caregivers, people think it's selfish to be self-compassionate. Well, if you give and you give and you give and you beat yourself up, your cup will run dry quicker than you know it.
Yeah.
It's not a zero-sum game. The more compassion flows inward, the more I have available to flow outward.
Can you just quickly take us through like what it would look like in a day to express self-compassion throughout the day?
Oh, sure. Well, I just went to the dentist yesterday. It's so funny. I don't really beat myself up anymore, but sometimes I kind of forget to be explicitly self-compassionate. So I'm in the chair, and it was really kind of stressful and uncomfortable. And I thought, oh, Kristin, give yourself compassion. So there are 3 components of self-compassion. I brought them each in versus mindfulness. I was where, yeah, this is really uncomfortable. I'm kind of nervous. I don't like people poking around my mouth. They're using those scraper things. They were drilling. And then the second component is common humanity. And that's when we remember that, I'm not alone. It's like in the moment, it feels like this shouldn't be happening. I'm supposed to be at home. I'm stress-free. But, a lot of people are afraid of the dentist. And who likes going to the dentist? This is normal. Nothing wrong with this. It's part of life. That made me feel less alone.
Mm-hmm.
The problem is when we feel alone and isolated, it's like kicking ourselves when we're down.
Mm-hmm.
And you remember, hey, this is just part of being a human being. It's, I'm not the only one. And then some kindness. I said, okay, Kristin, a little hard. It won't last forever. I'm here for you. So I actually say things, really warm, supportive things to myself. Literally, I don't say them out loud in public, but I say them internally.
Yeah.
And it really made a difference.
Yeah.
It went from being this really stressful situation that I was kind of trying to tamp down to like, okay, yeah, this sucks. Oh well. And what starts to happen over time, it's really, really interesting, is you start to focus less on what's happening and you start to focus more on how am I relating to what's happening.
Mm-hmm.
You start to get satisfaction, not just from things going the way you want them to, but you get satisfaction from feeling your heart's open. You feel connected to others in the larger world.
Mm-hmm.
You feel warm. You feel love in your heart. You feel mindful and calm.
Mm-hmm.
That's actually what we want.
Yeah.
So you don't really need circumstances to be exactly as we want them to be to have happiness or satisfaction. You can get that from opening your own heart and being compassionate to yourself and others.
Yeah.
And your kids.
Yeah. And I just, I love this because, I feel that for parents, raising kids today is harder than it was 5 years ago, harder than it was 10, 15 years ago. My kids are in their 20s, harder than it was 20, 25 years ago.
Yeah.
And something's got to give. Like it just can't keep getting harder and harder and harder. There has to be some salve, some sort of soothing thing to help parents sort of navigate what is inherently a very difficult job.
Yeah. Well, I couldn't do it without self-compassion.
Mm-hmm.
And by the way, I haven't taught many teens, but I did teach it to undergraduates at UT Austin who are kind of like teenagers. I can't tell you how many emails I've gotten saying the course changed their lives. Like, 5-10 years later, this was the most important course I took just because it's a life skill that no one teaches you.
Yeah.
It is a skill. It's a practice. It doesn't come totally naturally by evolution, or our culture doesn't teach us, but it's not rocket science. It's not that hard to do it once you just give yourself permission.
Yeah.
Suicidal ideation, I mean, it's just off the charts, especially with the pandemic, our teenagers these days. And so what that is people can't deal with their pain. They get so overwhelmed by their pain. They just want to end things because they can't deal with the pain. Self-compassion is the ability to hold pain with warmth and support and kindness so that we aren't so overwhelmed by it. I think is absolutely essential for anyone living a human life, but especially teenagers in today's world. There's just so much going on.
Yeah.
And it can't, there's several books, Self-Compassion for Teens.
Mm-hmm.
Most of the teens love it.
Yeah.
Um,
And you have some resources on your website around the self-compassion test.
yes, you can take a self-compassion test. I've got, I think, 20 guided practices.
Mm-hmm.
We've got books. We have the Mindful Self-Compassion Workbook. That's for adults. And Karen Bluth and Lorraine Hobbs have written a Mindful Self-Compassion Workbook for teens.
Yes.
So, they're similar, just the language is a little bit different for the teens.
Yeah.
So there's some children's books out there, and you can find those on the resources page of my website.
Okay.
So there's a
Awesome.
lot over the last 20 years. We've done a lot. There are a lot of resources out there now.
Mm-hmm.
And again, it's not rocket science.
It's just a matter of
remembering and giving yourself permission.
Yeah. Yeah. And doing the practice. It's like yoga. It's a practice. Yeah.
It's a practice, and it has to be explicit.
Mm-hmm.
Doing things like one really effective way to give yourself compassion is through physical touch, because we evolved. I mean, that's the primary way parents give kids compassion before the kids can speak, right?
Yeah.
Our bodies evolved to interpret touch as a signal of compassion and care. So putting your hands on your face or your heart, or, that can go immediately, not only to help, literally hold yourself, but you're actually working at the level, we know a lot about, it works at the level of the sympathetic nervous system. It changes the nervous system response, so it's calmer and more relaxed. So there's a lot of different ways you can practice.
That's amazing. That's so good. And I'm going to include all those links in the show notes so that parents can find your work more deeply, but also sort of get the ball rolling on self-compassion.
Right.
I appreciate your time so much. Is there anything else that you would want parents to know about self-compassion before we conclude?
Well, just really it's like this amazing resource we have available 24/7 in the middle of the night, no matter what you're doing. It's in your back pocket, available to help. Yeah. And it's like people don't even know it's there. It's like a superpower we don't even know is there. And it really will change your ability to cope with the tough stuff in life. So I really hope people just give it a try and find out for yourself.
Awesome. I love the superpower. That's a great way to end. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
You're welcome. It's been my pleasure.
Thanks for listening to the Nourished Child Podcast, where the #1 goal is to help you grow a nourished child inside and out.